Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in. Today I'm going to be doing a little review on my R35 GTR. Now this review is going to be a little bit different from most of the other GTR reviews out there. The reason why is most people that review the GTR, they do it from either the point of that they have it for the day as some sort of test car and they're just to review it and have it for that one day, or maybe they just bought the car and they're super excited, or they're within the first year or so of ownership. Me, however, I've had this car for 4 years now. Not only that, but it is my daily driver. I bought this car when it had 97,000 miles on it. It's now got 137,000 miles on it. So I'm going to be talking about the car from the point of view of using it as your daily driver. I'm going to talk about reliability, maintenance costs, practicality, and of course, how much fun it is to drive, as well as a few things that I would kind of change about the car if I could. However, two things before we get started. One, if you do want to see more automotive, particularly GTR content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And two, if you'd like to support the channel, I do have the JD Archer shop. If you go to jdarcher.bigcartel.com, you can see a limited selection of t-shirts I've designed that are for sale. But with that out of the way, let's start talking about the GTR. The first thing I want to do in this video is address probably the biggest question anybody has that's going to be watching this particular video has, and that is, given the fact that I've had it for 4 years, I put 40,000 miles on the car, just how reliable is the car and how much does it cost to really keep it on the road? Now, I'm sure if you've had this question, you've probably posted to like the internet, asking, how much does it cost to keep this on the road? And inevitably, I'm sure you've gotten that response. If you can't afford to buy 2 of them, you can't afford to own this car. I'm gonna let you know right now, that is just complete bull. Who's ever posting that probably doesn't even own the car and they're just parroting something that they've heard from somewhere else. To be honest, this is probably one of the most reliable cars I have ever owned. Now, for those of you that have been following the channel, to let you know my list of cars, my first car was a 69 Camaro. I then moved on to a 91 Miata, then a 94 Miata, a 97 Eclipse GSX, a Honda S2000, my first Mark IV Supra. I then had a 2010 Camaro, FD RX-7, R32 Skyline GTR, my second Mark IV Supra, and this. And really, aside from the Miatas, this car's really been the cheapest car to keep on the road. In fact, I really have not had a lot of issues with it. Given the fact that the car has 137,000 miles, I've only had 2 things break. And of those 2 things, one was very cheap and easy to fix, and the second one, well, could have been cheap, but I chose to make it more expensive, and so that's kind of on me. So to go over the more expensive thing that broke is the pressure sensors on the transmission. Now, I know if you don't own one of these cars, inevitably you've been hearing all of the horror stories about how these transmissions are made of glass, they'll break, it's the biggest issue of the car, and it's like 14 grand to basically get a new one. And to let you know, once again, a lot of that is probably being told to you by somebody who doesn't own the car. The issue I had with my transmission was not mechanical at all. It was the pressure sensors. And apparently this is a very common thing to go bad, especially when you cross over that 100,000 mile mark. In fact, mine went down at, I think, around 110,000 miles. Now, the great thing about the pressure sensors, they're not terribly expensive. You can actually get replacement ones for, I think it was like $200 to $300 off the top of my head. The bad thing is they actually sit on top of the transmission, which means you can't get to them while the transmission is in the car. So to get to the pressure sensors, you have to drop the transmission out of the car. So at that point in time, I needed to make a choice. I could either A, go the cheap route and just do the pressure sensors. And I think with labor and everything, it would have been about $700 if I remember right. Or what I did was, because the transmission was out of the car, might as well do a full rebuild on the transmission and upgrade. So what I did is I went to SP Engineering, and for about 7 grand, I did a stage 1 build on the transmission. So what that means is that the internals are fresh, the pressure sensors are new. There really shouldn't be any issues with this transmission for a long time. Now, even if you buy one of these, just to kind of make a little side note, and you're worried about the transmission, just let you know a lot of those issues have gone away as the time's gone on. Originally, the reason why the GTR had a bad reputation when it came to the transmission was it does have launch control, which is what lets you get from 0 to 60 in about 2.9 seconds. When Nissan first released the car, launch control was launching at too high of an RPM and it was shearing the gears. So if you pick up like an old GTR, like an 09 to 2011, as long as the launch control computer has been reflashed to what's called LC2 or higher, I believe they're up to LC5 at the moment, you really shouldn't have much of an issue. Second issue with those early generation GTRs is what's called TSB clips. They're about $45. They're real easy to do. So as long as those two things have been done, you should have a perfectly fine transmission, provided you're not running stupid horsepower. So, like I said, transmission, I did have the pressure sensors. It could have been a $700 fix. I made it a $7,000 fix. That was a personal choice of mine. The second thing that broke on this car was really stupid and easy to fix, and it was an idler pulley on the serpentine belt. At about 120,000 miles, the ball bearing in the idler pulley failed, causing it to seize. So for about, I think it was it $70 to $100 off the top of my head, I picked up a new idler pulley at about 30 minutes of my time, removed the serpentine belt, put the new idler pulley on, put the serpentine belt back on, and the car's been perfectly good. So other than that, mechanically, this car hasn't been giving me any issues whatsoever. Now, there have been a few other minor things that I've taken care of just out of personal preference. For example, some of the LEDs on the R switches went bad. Also, it's a very common thing with this car. I actually replaced the LEDs myself. I did a video on that. So if you do have a GTR and some of the LEDs are burnt out, I'll go ahead and put a link in the description down below, as well as a banner above my head. You can see how to fix those. But the great thing about that is, even if the LEDs are burnt out, the switches will still work. So you can still put it in R mode or comfort mode, whatever it is you want to do. So I really don't consider that like a repair job, as more of a maintenance, because this car still worked as it was supposed to do. But other than that, yeah, this car has not left me stranded. Aside from that, I mean, even when the pressure sensors went bad on the transmission, I could still limp the car home. I just had even gears, no odd gears. So, like I said, an amazingly reliable car. Now, as far as cost of maintenance, it's also been pretty cheap. It's actually probably one of the cheaper oil changes I do. So this car, I typically run what's recommended by Nissan, which is the Mobil 1 fully synthetic 0W40. And you can actually get about 5 or 6 quarts of that off of Amazon, or ironically enough, Walmart, for about 50 bucks. And then the oil filters, maybe another $10 or $12. So for about $60, you can do an oil change on this car. Now, of course, this is assuming you're willing to work on the car yourself, which I am. I do all the work on this car myself, except for the transmission. Basically, if you want to pay a mechanic to do it, it's going to run you anywhere from about $200 to $300, depending on the mechanic, which in my opinion is absolutely ridiculous. Don't pay that. Do it yourself. It's a real easy oil change to do. All you have to do is take off one of the under trays, which is, I believe, is about 6 bolts. And then the oil filter and the drain plug are just right there. It's super easy. Unlike when I look at like my Mark IV Supras or the R35 GTR, the oil filter was up underneath the intake panel, so you had to really fish your arm up in there to get the oil filter out. So this has been an extremely easy oil change to do. Spark plugs, I've done spark plugs twice now. They tend to run about $100 because you're running iridiums. So there again, not terribly expensive. And, you know, of course, you know, tires, whichever ones you pick, or, you know, how hard you're driving on how often you have to replace them. I've actually had both the Continental Extreme Contacts and the Michelin Pilot Sports PS3s, PS4s on here. And I gotta let you know that, you know, for daily driving and even some canyon driving, and even if you're kind of a rookie on the track, you're not gonna notice the difference. I mean, you can buy the PS4s if you want. They are technically a better tire. But from what I understand, it's not a huge difference unless you're really trying to save a thousandth of a second around a lap. So if you want to save yourself a couple $100, you can go with the Continental Extreme Contacts. They're actually a perfectly good tire. So that is it. Like I said, this has been an amazingly reliable car. Cost of maintenance has not been too bad. One thing I did forget, this is a little out of order. One thing I did do as far as maintenance, this tended to get a little more expensive, is I had the timing chain done. At about 102,000 miles, I got the dreaded P0011 code. If you get that code, that is pretty much the dead giveaway that the timing chain is due to be done. I could have done it myself, and I believe all of the parts would have been around $200 to $300. However, I kind of psyched myself out of it. I typically would have done it myself, but then, you know, when you know that the engine, if you do something wrong and something doesn't get aligned properly, it's going to run you about 14 grand at a minimum. I psyched myself out. I took it to Sebastian and Specialty Z. It ended up running 5 grand, but not only he did the timing chain, he did the seals, he did the guides, he did the tensioners, he did everything. So that was another expense, but there again, that's something that you're going to be looking at only when you start nearing the $100,000 mark or 100,000 mile mark. So there again, if it was a normal car, you'd be doing a timing belt anyways at 100,000 miles. Difference is if I'm doing a timing belt on like an RB or a 2JZ, I'll do it myself, no questions asked, because even if I screw up, even though it's a $3,000 motor, $5,000 maybe nowadays, even though you cry about it, it's still something you can kind of afford. 14 grand for an engine, that's the cost of a car almost. So there again, it could have been a cheaper fix. I chose to make it more expensive for my own peace of mind. But as I was saying, yeah, aside from the Miatas, this has probably been the cheapest car to maintain and the most reliable car I've ever had. The next thing I want to address is the overall practicality of the car. Now, when it comes to most high-performance cars, sports cars, they're typically not very practical to use on a daily basis and basically just be used as what they're designed for, which is a weekend warrior car or a track car. Now, you got to remember the GT in GTR stands for Grand Tourer, which means this should be a practical car for daily driving or making long trips. And I definitely got to tell you, I've done both. As you know, this is my daily driver, but when I originally bought the car, I bought it up in Seattle, and then I had to drive it all the way down to Los Angeles. So that's a pretty long drive. Didn't have any issues. The car was super comfortable. The drone from the exhaust is not too bad. If I remember correctly, there is some sort of noise canceling technology built into the stereo, and it really does work. When the doors close and the windows are up, there's really not a lot of outside noise that makes into the cabin. So it is extremely comfortable to drive. Now, it's probably not along the lines of a BMW or Mercedes, but you're not buying a BMW or Mercedes, you're buying Godzilla. So it is pretty darn good as far as that goes. When it comes to the actual ride, well, that's gonna depend on a couple of things. Now, if you have an 09 to about a 2014, the suspension is gonna be stiff, even if you're in comfort mode. So that is kind of cool. They give you a switch where you can put the suspension in normal mode, comfort mode, or R mode, which R mode, of course, is gonna be the stiffest. And in these earlier years, that switch doesn't make a huge difference. That suspension is gonna be stiff. So if you like stiff suspension, you're gonna love it. If you're one of those that wants a more of a cushier ride, in 2015, they retooled the suspension so it's softer. The switch, when you put it in comfort mode, does make a difference. I have ridden in a 2015, put it in comfort mode and R mode. There's a much more noticeable difference than there is in my 2013. But as long as you're okay with a rough ride, still a perfectly practical car. One of the things that does make it a little impractical though is its general ride height. So this car is actually still on stock suspension. So this is the stock ride height. That front lip only sits about 4¼ inches off the ground. It scrapes on everything. So you definitely have to be careful going in and out of some of those steep driveways, you know, for like restaurants or malls or whatever the heck it is you're going with the car. It's gonna scrape. In fact, owners consider the front lip an expendable item, meaning that you're gonna have to replace it ever so often, just simply because of the nature of how low this car sits and generally how roadways are designed. So that is something that does take away from the practicality of the car. But if you're okay redesigning your car a little bit with a new front lip every about 2 to 3 years, not that big of an issue. Another thing that makes this car actually fairly practical as a daily driver is the amount of space it has. Now, I can tell you that the space in this trunk is absolutely ridiculous. There is a huge volume in that trunk. The only thing that makes the trunk a little impractical is the general opening of it, because a lot of it is metal, despite how big the trunk lid is. But as long as you can fit it into the trunk, you can fit a lot in there. Originally, when I bought this car, I was single, and over the 4 years, I've gotten married and had a kid. So I can definitely tell you that even as a family car, it can work. I mean, that trunk is so big, I was able to fit everything my kid needs. The back seat's big enough to fit any car seat. And so in that, it's a little bit more practical even as a daily driver or family car. In fact, I did a whole video on whether or not the GTR can be a family car. If you want to see that, once again, I'll put a link in the description down below, put a banner above my head. If you're about to have a kid or have kids and you're thinking about getting a GTR, check that out. That might answer some questions for you. The other thing that makes this car practical is what I just discussed. It is actually a fairly reliable car. So unlike when I was driving my FD, you know, anytime I hear a weird sound outside of the car, I don't think I blew up my engine. So it's very comfortable as far as that goes. Now, as far as like practicality, as far as cost of fuel, that's going to depend on you. I tend to see on average about 22 miles per gallon. That's a combination of highway and city driving. To me, that's not too bad. I'm used to, like I said, my Mark IV Supras, my FDR X7s, my R32 GTR. You know, those were all getting about 18 miles to the gallon. So I am getting about 22 miles to the gallon according to the computer, and that of course is on Supreme. So depending on cost of gas in your area, that may affect how you feel as far as practicality of the car as a daily driver. But other than that, I would definitely say that, is it the most practical car? Let's be honest, no. I mean, if you want like a practical car, you're gonna buy like a 4-door Toyota Camry or something to that effect. But if you are gonna buy a car as your fun car as well as your daily driver, you can make this car work without an issue. I doubt you're gonna have too many complaints. I know, a bit of an abrupt change in scene. What happened is, while I was recording, I got a phone call from my wife. She owns a bakery and she needed me to do some cake delivery for her. So, seems how I wanted to talk about the driving experience of the car, figured it fit with where we were going anyways. And now that I think about that, it kind of also adds to the practicality of the car. Not only can I tote my family around in it, as you can see, the car seat's in the back, it's also good enough to do cake delivery. So, like I said, for a performance car, very practical car. But in this section, I do want to talk about the driving experience. The thing is, with most videos, they do talk about driving in the form of either track time or spirited canyon driving. And of course, I will talk about that. But I also just want to talk about what it's like to just drive in normal traffic, because it seems like a lot of people don't address that. So I'm going to address that here. So I'm going to break this into 3 sections. First, I'm going to talk about what it's like to drive on city streets. Then I'm going to talk about spirited driving in the canyons, which I've done. And I want to talk about what it's like to have on the track, because I've done that too, and that's something not a lot of owners have done. So we're going to go ahead and address that now. First, we're going to talk about city driving. As I did say, the GT in GTR does stand for Grand Tour. This car is designed to be driven and driven distances. And consequently, it is a very confidence-inspiring car when you're just driving normally on streets. As you can tell, it's not terribly loud in here. You don't really hear the other cars around me too much. You might be hearing my exhaust a little bit because it is an aftermarket exhaust. It's a MAP catback, but the drone isn't terribly loud or terribly annoying. And as you can hear, I don't have to shout to be heard. I can have a normal conversation, and it's not really an issue. So if you do plan on driving this, you know, as long as the windows are rolled up, it's actually pretty quiet in here. Next thing I want to talk about would be the overall cabin feel. So you have these seats, and these are not the normal seats. These are the Recaro seats that come in the black edition, because this is a black edition. So I really can't talk to the premium seats, but these Recaro seats are not bad. As I did say, I did drive from Seattle to Los Angeles. Didn't have any sore back or issues like that. Really good seats, and despite the fact that they have 137,000 miles on them, and this car was built in 2013, so it's about 11 years old, the seats are still comfortable. Like, they're still soft, the foam isn't all hard and compacted, so pretty happy with that. Now, as you can see, these seats do have some pretty good bolstering on them, and I have heard some complaints from some certain American body types that it makes it uncomfortable for them. Now, to let you know, and I'm going to put my cards on the table, I'm heavier than I really ever have been, just kind of due to what's happening with my life. And I'm kind of close to 200 pounds. And despite that, I don't find these seats uncomfortable. Like, yes, I feel the bolsters are grabbing me, but they're not uncomfortable. They're not pushing on me. I fit in the seat just fine. But I could easily see where anybody who's maybe pushing north of that 200 pounds, these. The other thing about the cabin is there's also plenty to do in here if you're like what I am right now, stuck in traffic on the freeway doing 20 miles an hour. There's lots for you to do in the cabin to kind of keep you a little bit entertained. Of course, you have the air conditioning and radio, so those are all within easy reach, so you can keep yourself comfy, listen to your stations, everything's all good. Of course, it does have connectivity to my phone. I do know that the earlier models you have to get an adapter for, but the 2013 links via Bluetooth to my phone, so I can run like Spotify or Pandora or whatever you want to run whatever music you want to hear. Of course, one of the real nice things about the car that I enjoy is the MFD. For when you start to get really bored, it gives you a chance to kind of look over, grab some information from your car, make sure everything's running as it should. And there's a couple different options when it comes to the MFD. Some people like to have the big gauge so they can see it, and like 2 smaller gauges. I prefer the 6 gauge layout because coming off of other engines like the RB and the FD, there's certain things that I just out of habit now have to keep my eye on. For example, I like to keep an eye on my boost, make sure I'm not boost spiking. I really wish this car had a lambda or a wideband O2 so I can keep an eye on my curves. Unfortunately, it doesn't have that option, but it does have coolant temp, oil pressure, and oil temp. To me, those are important. Like I said, coming off the RB, that's the Achilles heel of the RB engine. Trans oil temp and pressure as well, because even though I know my transmission's fine, it's not gonna have an issue, you still have it in the back of your head. So looking over real quick, making sure all of my temps aren't getting high, just lets me know that all the cars are working as it should, and I don't have any issues and have no reason to pull over. Of course, if you want to look at more information, you can hit the info button. You can take a look at your tire pressure and a few other things. So that's the cool thing about the cabin, is there's a lot to do. Recently, I found out on accident is the MFD will actually play DVDs, provided you're not moving. I did not know about that. One of my friends gave me a CD that they wanted me to listen to for training for my real job. It turned out it wasn't a CD, it was actually a DVD. I popped it in, I hadn't started driving yet, and it came up on my MFD. So yeah, you can actually drive somewhere and watch a movie on your GTR. So that's something a lot of people don't talk about that I've recently discovered. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to basically just driving this thing on the street, I kind of addressed before, and that's just the suspension and ride height. As I did say, this car sits really low, stock. I scrape this front lip in almost every driveway, and I take them at angles and do everything I can to try and make sure that I'm not going to scrape the lip. It's just going to happen. So like I said, if you're thinking about buying this car and having it for a while, just realize that you're probably going to replace the lip every couple of years. But like I said, it might be a bonus if you like changing the look of your car ever so often. So there is that. Suspension, talked about this a little bit too. If you have the 2009 to 2014, stiff. Even when you put it in comfort mode, it's going to be stiff. Now, if you're driving on the road like I am right now, which is fairly smooth, not really an issue. Actually feels pretty good because the car feels really planted and strong. But when you start going over some of those rough roads, particularly in California, where we don't take care of the roads in certain lower income areas, it's going to vibrate like crazy. It's going to shake the whole cabin. You're going to feel like your teeth are about to be jostled out of your head. And sometimes when I've gone around rough roads on a corner, and sometimes even on a straight, because the suspension is so stiff, the car kind of moves. So that's not something I'm particularly happy with. Now, if that's a concern for you, you can easily just pick up a 2015 or higher. The suspension's been retooled to be softer, and it is more effective when you switch into comfort mode from regular mode or R mode. If that's just not within your budget and you're still looking at like an 09 to 2014, a very common thing is owners of those cars will get suspension off of a 2016 and higher, and then that way you get the adjustability and the softer suspension. Seeing how I do like to drive this car a little bit harder, I do like the stiffer suspension, so I just kind of deal with it. But I gotta say, for the most part, aside from those few minor things, it's not a bad car to just kind of drive around on a daily basis. I know, another drastic change. I mean, not only am I outside the car now, but the audio and the video probably look a little bit different. Basically, as I was driving, the GoPro decided to glitch some more, which for those of you that have been watching my channel for a little bit, you know that's something I've been constantly fighting with. So I'm back, gonna finish this video on my cell phone because I do want to finish this video. As I was saying, as far as a daily commuter car, great car, perfectly comfortable. You can drive that car all day long, not really have too many issues. I know it's very common for people to drive from LA to Vegas. Definitely doing this car, not even think twice. Now, as far as canyon driving goes, the car is okay. I mean, let's be honest, the car is fast. It's very fast. And you're never really gonna go wrong with having a fast car and having fun in the canyons. So, it's good, but the problem is my opinion might be slightly skewed. I'm coming off of some cars that were phenomenal canyon cars. We look at my FD RX-7, my two Miatas, the S2000, kind of. I've had cars that were built for cornering. And although this car can corner, I mean, obviously it's proved it when this car set down some impressive lap times at the Nürburgring. My other cars may have been just better at it. And of course it's because this car is heavy. This car is a very heavy car. I believe it comes in at 38 to 3,900 pounds. So it's a heavy, heavy car. And when you start getting into some of those really tight twisties,
especially if it's a Canyon you haven't driven a whole bunch of times and still kind of new to it, it gets a little bit hairy because you know it takes a lot of work for those tires to change the trajectory of the car, and it takes a much bigger area for the car to slow down if you're coming in a little bit hot. So in that, it's not as fun in the canyons as some other cars. Now that being said, there are a bunch of computers in this car, so you can feel a little bit more confident knowing that if you get yourself into a little bit of trouble, the computers will kick in and pull you out of it. Of course, the all-wheel drive, always a great thing, because if you start to slip, they basically move the power up to the front tires and can pull you through a corner you'd otherwise have issues with. I have noticed that if you are really pushing the car through those corners though, in those canyons, it has a little bit of understeer. So if you're used to oversteer on something like a rear wheel drive, like I said, my Miatas, my RX-7s, understeer, not exactly the greatest thing because the car wants to continue to go straight instead of making it through those corners. So basically, are there better cars out there for canyons? Yes. Are you going to be disappointed and bored in the canyon with this car? No. Like I said, it is fast, especially if there is some good straight stretches. But like I said, it's both good and not good in the canyons. Now let's talk about the track experience with this car. Now this is where I probably differ from a lot of owners. Most owners of the R35 GTR will never take this to a track. They might have some fun basically sprinting through a canyon, and then they're going to go to Cars and Coffee, park it, brag about the fact they got 1,000, 2,000 horsepower. Maybe they'll do a drag event, but most of them are not going to do a circuit event like I did. And in that, I feel that is where you're really missing out. This car is built for this. Now, I did go to Streets of Willow, which is a tight technical course. I just talked about how there are better cars to use for a canyon. Probably the same for a tight technical course like Streets of Willow, but I still had a lot of fun with this car. Why? Because I have confidence in this car. This car is, for the most part, under the engine stock. So I drove the car to the track, had a blast on it, and drove back. Not a lot of issues. So it is a good, strong car for the track. Now, as for the experience, were there faster cars around the track? Yes, for a couple of reasons. One, I've only done a few track days. I'm not really a professional driver. So when you have these people that are at the track on like a weekly basis, they're going to be able to drive circles around you no matter what they're in. But at least I had a lot of confidence with this car. I was able to take it up to high speeds and it felt extremely stable. I was able to brake and go into corners. Now, that being said, I did get my brakes pretty hot. You know, let's be honest, even in a canyon, you're not going to be beating on them like you are on a track. So if you are going to take this thing to the track, make sure you address your brake pads, just as a little note. But it's definitely something I would do again. This also changed my philosophy on building the car. Originally, I was thinking, you know, okay, yeah, I want to do FBO, 650 horsepower, E85, all that fun stuff. But when I went to streets, I found out that this horsepower is more than enough for a track like that. Now, maybe if I went to Big Willow, which has got more straights, it's a more wide open track, I could really make use of more power. But for right now, this car is plenty fast. So that's a real advantage. If you do want to go to a track, don't feel like you have to modify this car, except for the brakes, before you go. Just go. Because then you're going to learn what it is you want to do to the car and how. So you're going to learn a lot about how to modify a car as it works for you, and not how to modify a car just to brag about it in a parking lot. So I had a lot of fun with this car. Take your car to the track. The last thing I want to talk about is things I just don't like about the car. Now, I know it's a GTR, it's awesome, it has all this potential, but the thing you're going to find, it doesn't matter what car it is, dream car, perfect car, does not exist. There's always going to be something or some things that you just don't like about the car, and you just have to figure if that's something you want to deal with or something you can modify to get rid of. But there's always going to be a few things you don't like about the car. In this particular instance, I've only found 3, and I've had this car for 4 years, and there's really only 3 things I don't particularly care about the car. The first thing is the driver's seat height. You sit really high in this car, in my opinion, and I don't particularly care for it. It really annoys me when I get in another car like my wife's Camry, and I feel closer and more connected to the road than I do in this car. And that's simply just because the seat sits so high. It almost feels like at times I'm somewhere between what would be like the right height of a street car and the right height of like a crossover SUV. And consequently, I want to feel low. I want to feel connected to the road like I did in like my FD and my Supras and stuff like that. This one, the seat just sits so high. Now, I might be able to fix that if I get an aftermarket seat, particularly one without a reclining issue. It might help me sit a little bit deeper in the car and get over that particular issue. But I haven't done that yet. I've been dealing with it for 4 years, so obviously it's not a deal breaker for me. I just wish that seat sat a little bit lower and closer to the road. The second thing I don't particularly care for with this car is just its overall size. It is a huge car. It takes up a lot of space. In fact, this might be one of the biggest cars I've ever owned. It may even be bigger than the Camaro I had, although I am not 100% certain. But it feels big, and so consequently, parallel parking it is a bit of a pain because it's so wide. I parked behind other cars, and my driver's side door is sitting more out in the road than other cars because the car is just so wide. Now, granted, that is a benefit when you're going at speed because the wider the car, the bigger the car, the more stable it is. But when it comes to daily driving and parking spots and stuff like that, the car is just huge. Plus, if I'm in a parking spot, particularly here in California, all these parking spots are just way too small. Like, it's almost like they figure everyone's driving Miatas when everybody's driving SUVs. And so consequently, even when I park as far as I can away from the door, if it's a particularly busy parking lot, if anyone's parked next to me, getting in and out of the car is a real pain, and door dings are gonna happen. So that's one of the annoying things about the car, is just its overall size. The final thing that just really annoys me about this car, and I know I've mentioned it a few times, is just the ride height. That front lip just sits so low on a stock configuration. It scrapes all over the place to the point that I just don't even feel like I could lower the car. I wouldn't mind lowering it maybe about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch, but I don't want to do that because that means that front lip is going to scrape even more. So I wish they designed the front where it didn't sit as low, which would have given me the option to drop the car all the way around and not have the scraping issues that I'm going to have. But that's pretty much it. You got to admit, for having the car for 4 years, doing the miles that I've done on it, to only have about 3 things that bother me about the car, especially things that I can personally deal with, is not bad. And there it is, my 4-year review of my R35 GTR. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go hit that thumbs up button to let me know. It does help the channel out a lot. As I did say at the beginning of the video, if you'd like to see more automotive, particularly GTR content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You can also follow me on all forms of social media, which include Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. There'll be links for those in the description down below. Now, after watching this video, if you have any questions, comments, if you think that there's something else I needed to address about the review of the car, go ahead and post in the comment section down below. I will respond to you. I thank you all for watching, and until next time, forget everything else, focus on the finish line.